quite so many people that wanted to tell our story here at Leicester. So it's really good to see so many of you. So I asked to come and talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing at University Hospitals of Leicester, and particularly around how we've been re-engaging with our clinicians, managers and services after quite a tough time at the Trust. So I will crack on and work my way through, and oh, there we go, it's working. Sorry, there was a little delay there. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about where we've come from and the journey that we've been on to start off with, just to set the scene. So a little while ago, back in 2019, we had a number of issues when external auditors uncovered a few problems with financial practices and some of the culture within the finance team at the organisation. We got placed into the NHSE's Software Recovery Support Programme, and it's been quite a traumatic time, I think, most of the organisation and particularly the finance team would tell you. So started from quite a low level at that point in time, and it's been a real journey over the last few years. So over that time, we have had a new CFO, new management team. The whole of finance and procurement has been through a management of change. And we've also implemented a cultural improvement programme. So alongside the day job, there has been a huge amount to deal with, and rightly so. I think we have made great strides over the past few years, and that just shows kind of where we were at that point in time. So one of the areas that we wanted to look at in particular was how we re-engaged with those services and rebuilt the relationships with not just our budget holders, but our clinicians and managers, and ensure they had confidence in the team and what the team were delivering, particularly because they're so key in ensuring that our financial success is sustainable, and it's directly linked to our ability to provide a good service. So in addition to strengthening our business partnering roles, so as part of the management of change, we put more resource into a number of areas, and particularly the business partnering elements. We also wanted to gain the views of the organisation about where we were good, where we were not so good, what their expectations were of us, and we wanted to bring out a two-way dialogue to assess where we were and then assess the effectiveness of the changes that we put in. And that survey led to a number of different things that we wanted to look at. So probably the first part of what we instigated or set up was the implementation of a finance and procurement skills development group, which was staff-led, and it covered a whole host of different things. So training and development, cultures, behaviours, integration, which was things like our work with One NHS Finance and professional bodies, and we did some stuff around finance systems and communication alongside a whole host of other things. That FPSD, as I said, was staff-led, and I think that's a key to the success of it, really, and the engagement within the department. It has been hugely supported by the senior finance team as well, with leads sitting on each of the work streams. So I think a lot of what I'll talk to you about today has been driven through some of that skills development group, and it's been a real kind of a really useful way of us tracking what progress we need to make and those kind of things. So from that FPSD group, some of the actions that came out around how we improve engagement was to be more visible, so to implement or increase the frequency of budget holder meetings and some of the inclusion of additional data within our budget reports, which I'm not going to talk too much about today. The two areas that I'm going to cover are a training program that we put together, named Demystifying UHL Finance. For those of you that do a lot with One NHS Finance, that might sound very familiar, and we'll cover that in a second. So that is a training day that was initially targeted to clinicians, but has been expanded out to cover managers, budget holders, aspiring managers, and anybody really that's interested in finance. We have the support of one of our finance and clinical educators in Akiban Maheshwaran, who's also one of our consultant anaesthetists. And it's really heavily supported by Lorraine Hooper, our CFO. And each section on that is covered by one of our subject matter experts and a lead within each of those different areas. I say that's one of the things I'll be covering. And the other one was about how we've redesigned some of our data to present to clinicians and managers to provide more meaningful insight to them. We're conscious that a lot of the data that goes out isn't always easily digestible, doesn't always point people in the directions that we want them to be pointed. And so we've done some work around that. And they're the two bits that I'll be covering off today. So on the training front, so our Demystifying UHL Finance training days, is it a blatant plagiarism of the One NHS Finance Demystifying NHS Finance training days? No, probably a little bit. We have taken the structure of the One NHS Finance days, but written it from the ground up. So we recognise the value, and AK, who's that clinical lead and one of the SROs for Future Focus Finance, was really keen that we do something locally, but tailored very much to our organisation, the individuals within that organisation, the objectives that we wanted to achieve as a finance department and as a hospital trust. So AK's done a lot of support on that. He helped us get that up and running, and that's been invaluable in what we do. The content that we've built was kind of put together in a couple of ways. So as I said, we put out a survey to individuals to understand what it was that they wanted from finance and where they thought the gaps were. And we've also taken expertise from each of the leads within each of the services that we're looking at. With the aim that we provide something that's tailored, it meets the needs of our organisation, it meets the needs of our stakeholders, and it meets the needs to some extent of us as a finance department. And when I talk about the needs of us as a finance department, I'm sure pretty much everybody on the call will have some frustrations around the way that the organisation interacts with you and the processes that you need to undertake. And we've taken a really big opportunity to put some of those things out there as part of that training day to say, not just this is information that you need to know, but this is the way that we need you to support us and help us along that journey to make it as smooth and efficient as possible in terms of us providing a service back to you. So in a similar way, again, we cover an introduction to NHS finance. We talk about patient care contracts and commissioning, the whole income side of things, clinical coding, procurement, financial management. My specialist subject, which is NHS costing and PLICs. And then we have somebody from our quality and efficiency improvement team. So basically our CIP lead. And then we talk to the organisation about business cases as well. And one of the things that has made the sessions so much of a success to start off with, we've run 3 sessions so far, and they're planned for bi-monthly moving forwards, is the support of the CFO. So the CFO comes to the start of the day, gives some background and context to the position of the organisation and where we want to get to. And it really, really sets the scene well. She comes back, closes the day as well, And we have that day supported by a facilitator who's there for making sure everything runs smoothly and to time. And we also have a deputy director of finance who sits on in all of those sessions, just in case there's any questions that are more around the strategy of the organisation or the department that some of those subject matter experts might not be able to answer. So it's a really well supported session, and as I say, it's tailored to the needs of our organisation, hopefully. So it is very much on the back of the Demystifying NHS Finance programme, but hopefully a little more useful to our own individuals within the team. So on the back of that, we've had 150 people attend so far. I think 2 out of the 3 sessions have been fully booked. They've been offered online, remotely, and in person. And we've got lots of people actively chasing future sessions. So I think word is getting around between colleagues in terms of the value that some of this stuff can add. We've also had people coming back and asking whether we can do specific sessions tailored to certain services, which are all things that we're going to look at moving forwards. I mentioned that they're scheduled bi-monthly. And one of the things that we'd really like to do is improve that offering over time. So after every session, we send out a feedback form asking whether it covers the needs of the individuals that attend, whether there's anything that wasn't covered that they would expect to be covered. We ask them for information about the quality of delivery, all sorts of things to try and get a really well-rounded view. And we do a mop-up session after that feedback has all been received so that we can talk to each of the presenters and content creators and look at tailoring that moving forward. A couple of little things on there just about some of the feedback that's come back so far. Again, reference to the senior leaders being in the room. Some people thinking that this should be offered to everybody within the organisation, especially new starters, and that it covers a really good broad range of topics. In terms of the scoring that we get, 96% across all 3 of those sessions have said they've been either satisfied or very satisfied with the content, 94% with delivery, and 82% of people's expectations were met. So it's not all roses, it's not perfect. There is still more work that we need to do. And some of the not so positive feedback, a lot has been around the range of people that we're presenting to. So one of the things we want to look at, and is on my list to talk to the department about, is how we kind of create a level playing field and deliver the right content to the right people. So at the moment, it's almost anybody that wants to attend can attend. We're looking at maybe taking the level of some of these presentations down to a base level. So we'll have an introduction to each of these subjects, but then maybe go on to do showcase sessions for each of those individual areas on a as needed basis. So we might kind of take down the level of intensity of it for the plicks and costing session, explain the basics, but then we'll have an in-depth follow-up to that for an hour or so. And that's mainly because a lot of the people that have attended have said it's a lot of information to cover in a day. Which it is. I've sat on some of those sessions. It is a lot to take in, and if you are completely new to finance, that can be a huge amount. So by no means perfect, but we've found that it's been a really good way to engage. We've had lots of feedback, not just through the forums, but people getting in touch with each of the presenters to then look at how they can use some of that information moving forward within their roles. So we'd really encourage anybody to do it. Really, you've got a great resource in One NHS Finance, Future Focus Finance, some of the work the HFMA produce to kind of give you a base starting point. But we found that engagement has increased across our organisation just on the back of the 3 sessions that we've provided so far. The aim is that we get out to every single consultant within the organisation. and anybody else that wants to come. So we will keep providing these sessions for as long as there is demand. So some of this stuff I might get a little bit geeky about, and I'll apologise in advance. So Plix is my thing. I'll talk a little bit about what that is for people that don't know in the room in a second. But one of the things that that we wanted to address was the fact that sometimes financial information that is produced within the organisation can be useful to some extent, but it doesn't answer all of the questions that we want answering. There are huge challenges at the moment about how and where we utilise our resources and whether we do that with best value at the moment. So traditionally, the main set of data that goes out to our budget holders and our services are financial management reports, budget reports, which give you a mechanism by which to monitor and control costs at a very localized level. But they don't, if we're all honest, I say we're all honest, this is my personal opinion. I don't think they provide a huge amount of insight into where and how we utilize our resources and how that impacts, or how the way that we treat our patients impact on the way we utilize our resources and get value. So my baby, which is the Plix system, does give a lot of this insight by combining ledger information with activity data, but it can be a lot to digest and takes quite a lot of time to get to the bottom of. So for those people in the room that haven't experienced Plix or don't know what Plix is, in essence, we take the entire cost of running the organisation and we pass all of those costs down to the patients that come through our doors. There are a huge number of systems that we use to do that and to understand that patient journey. So we try to understand where those patients go in the hospital, who they're treated by, whether they've been through theatres, how long for, how many people were there during that operation, what drugs they've been issued, what diagnostics they've had. Pretty much anything that happens to a patient, we try to record and quantify financially by linking ledger data to all of those activity feeder systems to get a fully absorbed cost. That's a really quick intro to what Plix is. I could talk about it for hours. But in essence, we get a fully absorbed cost and we can understand how our cost then compares to things like the tariff that we generate for the activity that we undertake. And we can use it to understand things like clinical variation. So if consultant A treats a patient differently to consultant B, we can see the financial implications of that and assess whether we think that's good value or not, alongside information like patient outcomes, satisfaction, and things, because they're ultimately the most important thing and what we're here for. And so what we've started to do is seek different ways of presenting data that we already produce to give some easily digestible and accessible information. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail now. So one of the things, I can see a couple of questions coming up actually. I'll come back to those in a second if that's okay. So one of the things we were challenged with was how can we use Plix data to measure performance? So rather than just looking at how much do we spend to treat our patients compared to the income that we generate, or how do we compare nationally, can we see how our performance is changing over time? And that's particularly been important for us because we're no longer paid entirely on a PBR contract, so there's lots of block elements. And here at Leicester, because of the issues we had with our accounts back in 2019, our national cost collection outputs, which is the nationally aggregated Plix data, haven't been accepted because there's been no accounts to reconcile to because of the delays with those processes. So we needed a different way to look at that data and try and understand how we've been performing as an organisation and a set of services. So we've developed an internal measure that tracks both the cost and the output of our services over time. So to do that, we've looked at creating a common activity unit, which is very, very similar to the model hospital weighted activity units, if you're familiar with that. So what that does is try to compare every piece of activity that you do to a standard elective inpatient stay. We've then taken the PLIX data that allocates costs down to a patient level and tracked that over time and adjusted it for where we know there's changes in methodology or changes in services that might impact on that. So ultimately, we come up with a chart that takes your cost of delivering your services, divides that by the number of weighted activity units or the output of that service is produced, and we plot that on a statistical process control chart, SPC. Before I show you what that looks like, just a little bit about the data that goes into it. So we bring in the PLIX costs, as we've said, but we, for this purpose, aggregate that to a specialty and points delivery level, and we extract that by financial period from the start of 1920 right up to our most recent information. So we're just producing Q3 at the minute, which will go into this. Alongside our PLIX costs in our system, we also pop the tariff income from our SLAM system. So we match that at a patient level, but in theory, people could do this if you're able to match that tariff income to the same specialties and point deliveries that you might have your costs assigned at, because not everybody, I believe, puts their income into their PLIX model or their SLR models. We then do some work in the background to take out inflation. So we deflate current costs back to 1920 levels. So the reason for any changes in our cost per weighted activity unit aren't kind of skewed by inflation. And then, as I mentioned on the last one, we try and account for any known differences as well. So we know there are a couple of issues with some of our bits of A&E data back in one of the financial years. So we do some work to smooth those things and take the impact of that out. What we end up with is a version of this chart here. So I think this was up to the end of month 6, Q2, 23-24. So you'll see that our cost per weighted activity unit back in 1920 was probably hovering around the £4,300 mark. During the pandemic, that increased significantly, mainly due to the fact that a lot of our activity reduced, but we still maintain a lot of those fixed and semi-fixed costs. Over time, that's improved. We see continual improvement with a reduction in that cost per weighted activity unit until certain points in 23-24, which we think are in the main down to things like industrial action, where we pay premium costs and we've reduced activity and things like that. So it's a really good tool to assess performance, both at a trust level, but then also our clinical management groups and our services and right down to point of delivery within those services. So the mechanism in which we produce this and the data that underpins it is all of that spec and pod level. We're able to use some drop down things at the top here, which then allow us to drill into each of the services and CMGs. What we're seeing is that there are a number of services whereby the cost per weighted activity unit is starting to creep back up again. So they've done some really good work and it's starting to creep back above the mean and towards the higher control limits within that SPC chart. And they're some of the services that we want to work more closely with to understand the reasons behind that and whether we can do anything in particular. And this is not something that ordinarily would be available through our traditional financial reporting or even the PLIX data that we produce and provide a snapshot with. In response to this data originally being produced, we were getting quite a few queries back around whether we could provide more information to help people identify where these movements might be happening. So the first step on that was to almost get rid of some of the noise. So get rid of the bits from the pandemic and look at where we were in 1920, which was our baseline, and where we are in the most recent 12 months. So we do something to look at what the average cost per weighted activity unit was way back before COVID, what it is now, and if you take into account the number of weighted activity units, what does that difference in cost per weighted activity unit translate to in terms of a financial potential opportunity? It's not an absolute opportunity, but potential opportunity. So on the next slide, what we do is provide something. Again, we drop down so we can look at each service. Within general surgery here, which was one of those basket cases that we're looking at, we split it out by point of delivery, and we say, okay, for our non-elective activity, there's a difference of just over £1,000 for each weighted activity unit. In the last 12 months, we've undertaken just over 5,000 of those. So that's a potential increase in real terms cost of nearly £6 million for the output that we're producing, which is huge. Some of the other areas we see similar increases, and some there's a slight improvement. Again, using the underlying PLIX data, we then try and break that £1,000 or that £6 million cost down into the different cost drivers that go through our system. So we can see that a lot of that is due to increases in medical staff ward and theatre elements for each weighted activity unit. Now, what we have to remember is that that's not necessarily just an increase in cost. It could be a reduction in activity for the same amount of cost, or it could be a reduction in complexity, because it's all done at a patient level and mapped HRGs. So once they've got that information, we try and provide some extra context, some standard kind of productivity measures around length of stay, theatre productivity, and our quality of coding, just to see whether that helps us identify what could be driving some of these elements. In this particular instance, our length of stay doesn't seem to be a driver of why our ward costs have increased, but at least that means they can go and look elsewhere at what that might be. So have they employed more staff, or are they using more premium pay than they usually would, those kind of things. Our average cases per list in theatres has reduced a little, which could contribute to the increased cost. But one of the big things here is around the coding and complexity that comes from a piece of work from our informatics team. So they've analysed the data that goes through our clinical coding, and it looks as though the complexity has reduced significantly. So that could be a key contributing factor. In terms of where we go with that and what we do with it, we've initially taken it out for feedback, and that's gone to some of our management teams. It's gone to all of our heads of finance, business intelligence specialists, transformation leads, and they've all found that they think that it will be really useful information to help signpost areas that they should concentrate on, focus on, and they've got a really strong desire to try and understand what those variances are and what might be a genuine opportunity compared to a warranted variation or a warranted reason for that movement. We have had investment in our nursing workforce to ensure safe staffing levels and things like that. So some of that will contribute to what this productivity output is showing, but is that necessarily something that the organisation sees as an opportunity moving forward? It might not be. So we're going to do some work to try and understand what things have been conscious decisions in terms of the way we either treat patients or the way we resource certain areas, and what might be a genuine deterioration in productivity. So sharing that data with our CMG teams and picking a couple of areas to focus on. So who are those poor performing specialties? That information is going to our performance review meetings and transformation progress meetings, with actions from that then being escalated up to our trust leadership team and a subcommittee of the board. The aim being that those actions are then followed up all of those forums, and there's continued tracking for those services to ensure that we either know the reasons for those deteriorations or that work is being done to resolve them and take that kind of thing forwards. One thing that we're really conscious of is making sure that we link in with trust-wide initiatives as well. So we know there's a trust-wide transformation programme to improve theatre productivity. What we don't want to do is set people off on a piece of work that is already being done elsewhere. So we're looking now at how we link all of that data and work across the organisation, not just looking specifically at those individual bits and bobs. I think there's probably only another slide or two just about some of the other bits and bobs that we're doing. So I might just have a quick look at the chat because I've seen a couple of questions come up. Well, I say a couple, there's a few. First one is nice and easy. So what Plix system do we use at UHL? So that is IQVIA's cost engine. I think it used to be called User Cost. I think they've rebranded it as their IQVIA cost engine now. So we've had that for probably coming up to 4 years, I think. We used to use a previous system. It didn't really work for us when NHSE put the costing transformation programme together in the additional granular level detail, and we're really happy with that. I don't want to plug private providers too much, but we're really happy with that system. We find it works really well for us in terms of having flexibility and the ability to reflect the way that we provide our services. That's good. The next question on there. Can your Plix also accept carbon data capture so we can review both? I have to be completely honest, I'm not too sure what you mean, Sarah, by carbon capture data. Did you want to?
Yes, so I am Head of Sustainability for Frimley Trust, and we are looking at the financial model for business cases and everything, but we're also looking how we look at the financial impact and the carbon impact. So you're looking at the cost of products, but if I bring in a product that actually brings the cost down and the carbon down, we can track both on the net zero strategy. And a lot of people, I find, accept more a financial impact before they accept a carbon impact.
Okay, I think you're right. I think they probably do. It's not something we've looked at, to be perfectly honest. We are always looking at how we can improve things moving forwards, and that's probably one to add to my long list of things. So at the minute we only put pounds through our Plix system. One of the things that we would like to do more is to put more information. This is probably top of that long list of things, or some way towards the top, is putting workforce information in there, things around whole time equivalents and things like that. We need to have conversations with our software suppliers about what can go in alongside those pounds metrics. I'm sure there are things we can do, but it's not a conversation that we've started as yet. If anybody else is aware of a system that can do those things, I'd be really interested to hear. So we've got one from oh, and there's a, can you please share the slides? Yes, absolutely. We can send those over. Not a problem. Mark's asked if we're going to keep 1920 as our baseline. Is there any thoughts around changing our baseline to 22, 23? There are thoughts about whether we change our baseline. No decisions have been made as yet. I think there is, whilst we're still kind of challenged by NHSE at times around whether we've we're still away from the 1920 baseline. I think we'll continue to have to monitor against that. It might be that we provide two separate baselines, in the same way that NHSE's implied productivity looks at some of that. I think they show you your movement against both 1920 and the previous financial year. So that's perhaps something that we could do. Absolutely. What else have we got on there? So one from Ian Smith. How does our internal reporting align with your local ICS, ICB? So I was having a conversation with somebody earlier, it was our software supplier actually, about whether we can share data better within our ICS and ICB to understand where we are compared to other providers. We're in quite a unique situation in Leicester, so we are the only acute provider in Leicester. There is Leicester Partnership Trust, who also provide community and mental health services. I think I saw somebody on from LPT just now. So in terms of how we align our data and compare to other providers, we don't really do that. I don't know whether there was anything else around that question, but certainly from a comparing ourselves to other acute providers, it's not really applicable within our ICB. Although we are starting to work more closely with Kettering and Northants. I think we've got some shared management structures now, so we'll be looking at how we might do that moving forwards. I can just see Ian's come on.
I suppose, Steve, that we're based up in the northwest in Lancashire and South Cumbria, and there are 4 acutes, and I work for the Mental Health Trust. I suppose what I was saying was that from the troubled place that you've come to the place where you are now, creating these reports, I just wondered, you've explained the context you're in, but if it's working for you and you're seeing positive outcomes, then if there were more providers, how then would you collaborate? And as you just said, that if it's only yourself, it's obviously difficult, but if you're trying to hold hands and work elsewhere across other ICSs and ICBs, it would allow the good work to be shared. And that's where I could imagine that you might get 4 trusts all thinking they're doing a great job internally, but they're not talking to themselves. So that's where I was trying to reach out to you to see if you'd cracked it and been able to share that information.
Certainly not cracked here yet. We're always looking at how we can improve it, as I said a couple of times. I think it'd be really good if we could look at this kind of thing across all of the providers. So if we could bring LPT on board. I know obviously the PLIX agenda within mental health and community is a little bit behind the timeline from acutes, but it's certainly something that we've had some very kind of tentative discussions about in the past, but I think a lot of it is all down to resourcing and where people are on that kind of costing journey and what data is available, really. But yeah, I think the more people that can kind of look at data across organisations and across peer groups, I think the better, really. So we'll continue to work, and we're happy to share some of what we do if people would like to try and replicate. Oops, sorry, I've just lost my mouse. So Mark Cornwell was asked how we share the data with services. So at the minute it's Excel spreadsheets. As I say, they're distributed at the moment via SharePoint, and people can access that. We are looking at whether we develop some dashboards on the top of this. So we want to do a proof of concept initially in Excel, make sure we knew that it worked and that it was useful. But we are looking at the moment in terms of whether we can replicate that in terms of some either Click or Power BI dashboards. For me, whilst the dashboards would be a useful thing, because they can be easy to kind of navigate and get to, I think the more important thing for us really is the journey that we go on once that data is shared and how it's used within services, and how our board and our senior teams can take assurance that we're heading in the right direction and doing the right things with that. So I think the governance and the structure around the reporting of that is probably the bit that we'll focus on initially before getting the slickness of some nice shiny dashboards. I think. Hope that answers your question, Mark. Yasmina, what success or outcomes have you achieved value-wise? So this data that we've put out on tracking productivity has only very recently gone out. So I think it's probably a bit early days to say what successes we've had from that. More generally, there are probably quite a few successes we've had in terms of sharing similar data and the underlying data with PLIX in terms of identifying differences in clinical practice that aren't necessarily backed up by improved outcomes and things, where people have taken actions to change their services. We've had quite a few business cases that have been approved on the back of using some of the PLIX data to provide evidence around the value of some suggested changes in practice and investments. And we've used our costing data quite a lot for helping to identify issues in things like clinical coding. So it's not only good for looking at whether you're efficient or inefficient. Sometimes it isn't always about whether you're not doing things in the right way in terms of treating your patients. It might be around whether you're coding your data appropriately and being appropriately reimbursed for that. So we work quite closely with our coding and commissioning teams, as well as all of the clinical teams, looking at what they can do to change. So it's quite a there's been quite a few instances of where we've done things, but not particularly off the back of the productivity tool, because it has only very recently gone out, and it's only going to be going to those the forums around PRMs and transformation program progress meetings this month. So hopefully we'll be able to come back in a few months' time and tell you about some more success stories for that kind of thing. Another one from Mark, do we link any of it to patient outcomes? Not directly in the system. We haven't got to that stage yet, but we do actively encourage everybody that looks at the data to look at it alongside that. And if we're able to help with that process, then we will. One of the first things we say when we go out to clinicians is this data is important and useful, but it should not be taken in isolation. I think it's really, really important to keep that high on the agenda, that we need to be conscious of patient outcomes. Aaron has asked how or WOW differs to the model hospital. It doesn't massively. So the model hospital WOW uses national average prices to calculate the number of weighted activity units. Because we process this in year, and because the model hospital methodology runs data through an old grouper, we don't have the facility to do that. So we take tariff and use that rather than a national average price to create our weighted activity units. We adjust that tariff year on year for inflation as well, so that we're kind of comparing like for like. So it's really, really similar in methodology, but we use tariff values rather than national average costs. Hope that answers that one. Sharon Deep has asked, in terms of finance team culture change mentioned at the start, what tangible actions and goals were identified? Were there any barriers, and how did the team overcome these? That's a huge question. Where do I start? I have got Donna, who is our Deputy Director of Finance, on the call, and I'm hoping that she can help to answer some of that.
I'll just put my hand up for you, Steve, to jump in, give you a
Save
breath.
me.
So actions and goals. What we did was I did a lot of one-to-one interviews and focus groups and development sessions with staff to see what the problems were, and more importantly, focus on what they wanted it to look like. So the outcome was, there was no communication with staff, there wasn't any support, there wasn't any development of staff. They didn't feel able to speak up, there was bullying and harassment going on. So there were a lot of issues. So we kind of themed an action plan, and I suppose some of the tangible things we've done. So in terms of things like comms, we've now got monthly engagement events that the CFO leads for the whole directorate. And we've got away days that we do. We're just developing some away days that are actually system wide rather than just for the organisation. We've created a newsletter. So it's just to try and get that comms going. But we've done loads of stuff, really. We've developed a behaviours charter, which we've asked people to sign up to so that we understand what's acceptable behaviour and what's not, and that we give ourselves permission to call it out when we see it or experience it. We've set up mental health and wellbeing cafes that are virtual every month, which help support people. Just, we all suffer with similar issues, similar problems, and it's just sort of sharing experiences and coping mechanisms. We've redone our appraisal paperwork because people said that was a tick box exercise. We've tried to make that more relevant, and we're still moving that on at the moment. We did recognition awards, monthly recognition awards, which have been really popular. They've been going for about 18 months now, and people just nominate people in the directorate for something they've done, work related or personal. Just making a cup of tea for someone sometimes needs a shout out because it's what you needed on that day. We've set up best practice groups, particularly in financial management, to start to share best practice and get more consistency across the board. We've put in development roles in our structure where people have said they've had a ceiling, especially with the band 7 being qualified. We've put in a lot of band 6 development roles, support staff to be qualified, and then they move automatically into a 7. So there's tons of stuff. I would say, were there barriers? For us, probably not, because we were in a place where it was pretty poor. The culture was awful. So I think most people wanted it to improve. The key way to do that, though, was just constantly listening and saying, you've said this is what we're going to do. Is it working for you? If it's not, we can change it. We can do something else. And it was just that constant, which we've still tried to do, that constant open comms right the way up to the CFO. She is totally open to people emailing her directly and answering, any challenges that staff might have about the behaviours that are going on. So the comms is really key. You're always still going to have one or two that really aren't on board with it, but if you get the majority, you identify your champions. The FPSD group that Steve talked about at the beginning was really key in moving this forward. And as he said, that was staff led. That wasn't by management. That was staff saying this is what we want to do and this is how we're going to implement it. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Donna. There's one or two more questions, I think. So Pam, hi Pam. Do you run your Demystifying UHL finance sessions online or face-to-face? So the first two we ran hybrid sessions. So we had a face-to-face audience, but also online attendees, which was great for getting the message out there. But there were some issues around making sure that you engage with the online people in the same way and to the same extent as those who were in the room. So we have moved to a model now where we will be undertaking the majority of them on a face-to-face basis, but then offering online sessions as well separately, because I think it's much easier to focus on one particular method of delivery rather than having to try and manage the two at the same time. I think in the future, as our facilities at UHL get a bit better, that might be easier. Some of the rooms that we were doing that from didn't have great facilities in terms of the way they were set up for virtual bits and bobs, but it's something that we'll constantly review, I think, and look at how we deliver that moving forwards. And other ones about slides. There's another one about how we promote the finance days. So they go on to our intranet site. So we have somebody from the comms team who shares that on the intranet site for us. We also share that information with our medical director's PA, who emails it out to all of the consultants. And I want to say there's something else as well, but it completely escapes me at the minute. I'm sure we get it out there in a third way as well. But we found that with the few methods that we've got, we are filling those sessions, and as I said earlier, people are actively asking when those next sessions are, which is really, really useful. Oh, they're also just recall, they're also on Helm, which is our training and development kind of platform where some of our courses are advertised. So people book on through Helm. So when people are searching for finance training and things like that, it will pop up as an option on there. So yeah, it seems to be working well so far. I think if the demand tails off, we'll look at other ways of getting that message out. But at the minute, it seems to be working. Oh, is there one key piece of advice you'd give to someone to make finance training sessions a success? So it kind of links in with a couple of the last bits that I was going to say. So I think in terms of, I'll come back to the question in a second. In terms of engaging well with the organisation, there's kind of three things that I think are really important for us to focus on. So one is ensuring that you're visible and accessible. One is making sure people have all of the skills and education that they need to be able to do the job and work with you collaboratively. And how we present data can be a really key factor. It's not, I think it's often overlooked in terms of how we present data to people, in terms of how we engage with them. I think a little effort will go a long way. So all of these things that I've talked about today, with a little bit of plagiarism, with a little bit of help from your friends, we've been able to turn some of this around quite quickly, and it's made a huge difference in terms of the way we engage. The support from your senior team, I think, is probably one of the things that I would suggest will help make that session a success. So the higher the importance placed on that training and the way that training is sold and delivered and supported by the senior team, I think can be really important. I know we've said that our sessions are staff led in terms of the FPSD group and everything, but we couldn't do a lot of that without the support and the permission to do that from our senior team, and for them to make sure that we've got time to do that work and to dedicate to doing that kind of thing. So I think that makes things ultimately so much easier when we've got people like Donna and Lorraine within the organisation that provide you with that support and permission to take those things forward. It not only releases you with the time, but it gives you the confidence to do those things and know that you're doing the right things. And the other one, the bottom one, again, a great tip, and one that I'm a great advocator of: pinch other people's ideas and tap into your networks. There are so many people out there doing such good things that really won't mind if you piggyback on their ideas, if you want to talk to them about the way that they're doing things. And usually if there's a problem you're facing or something you can't overcome, there's either somebody else doing it out there or has already done it already. So I think getting that support of your senior team, utilising resources that are already available, make getting those sessions together better. But I think working on feedback and listening to the organisation's needs, if you can make that relevant to what people are doing on a day-to-day basis, they're more likely to listen, to engage, and to help you take forward your agenda as well. So I think there's a lot of listening and working alongside other people to understand what it is that they want to achieve that helps you make those training sessions a success. I hope that answers the question. Amazingly, I think I've run to time, unless there's any other questions. No? Looks good to me. So I will share my slides with Aoife, and I hope you can distribute them for us.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I can share them with everyone.
Brilliant. Oh, might have a last question from Pete.
If you go to...
Apologies, no, it wasn't you. I was pressing the wrong button. I was trying to react with a clap to say thank you very much, but I pressed the wrong button. So apologies, didn't take it down in time. Thanks very much.
No worries. No worries. Thank you. Lovely. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon and enjoy your weekends.